What's up again, guys? Thank you so much for watching my Acre Right ranking video, if you have. And if you haven't, check it out. And don't worry, I still have that Scott Pilgrim video planned in the near future as well. But in the meantime, I figured I'd pull out another review of a few newer movies to hold you guys over until that video comes out. So let's not waste any more time and get started, as the first movie I'm going to be talking about today is Inside Out 2. Pixar has now made a follow-up to their big hit on how the mind works with Inside Out. This time the emotions have to struggle with anxiety. Literally.
A new emotion! Wow!
Oh, I'm sorry.
During this time, they come across more new emotions and go on another crazy sort of adventure to prevent Riley from losing control of her emotions. Something I've mentioned in passing quite a few times, but never had a full-fledged video on the topic, is that I absolutely adore the original Inside Out. This is honestly an easy top 10 Pixar movie for me, as it's everything I look for from the studio. It's creative, funny, and just does an excellent job grabbing you on a literal emotional level in the way Pixar is great at. Now, with the prospects of a sequel coming into play, I noticed a lot of people were mixed and a little skeptical on this film having a follow-up, and I noticed particularly for two reasons. First off is that many have claimed that Pixar has fallen off from its initial glory, to which I strongly disagree. Not to say everything at Pixar right now is going that good or great. There's definitely areas of improvements for the studio. But honestly, in the mix of other things under Disney's belt that have gotten worse in recent years, I feel like Pixar has been affected by Disney's declining quality in their brands the least. Outside of maybe one movie, I think most of the Pixar movies this decade have been pretty good actually. In fact, some of them are even great. So I don't want to shrug off Pixar as not so good just because other Disney brands have fallen off for the worse, and maybe a few weaker films. The other reason why some are skeptical of this getting a sequel is the fact that Pixar hasn't quite been the best with sequels. Now, I don't think the sequels Pixar has made were bad, for the most part, but outside of Toy Story, there hasn't been a Pixar sequel that has matched the same level of quality as their predecessor. So I could see why there might be some skepticism of Pixar tackling a sequel again, especially with the concerns of them relying too much on sequels. However, Inside Out is a strange case because if you ask me, if there was any recent Pixar property that actually had some potential to have its concept expanded upon, it's Inside Out. Like, this could easily become the new Toy Story, where we see Riley grow up and the other emotions having to deal with that in the same way the toys dealt with Andy growing up. The concern was whether or not Inside Out 2 was actually going to succeed with being a proper follow-up to a movie that was as incredible as the first. Well, if there's something that I could say that's any indication of that, is that this might very well be the best direct Pixar sequel since Toy Story 2. Inside Out 2 is fantastic. It is very much what you would like from a sequel to an excellent Pixar movie. Unlike other sequels where it just feels like a repeat of the first, Inside Out 2 does more of what a sequel should do. Expand upon the first in new and interesting ways. Sure, the film is not without its similarities and callbacks to the first, but it never relies on them, and mixes things up just enough to where it doesn't feel like a retread. Like, it's still an adventure that Joy has to go to the subconscious, yet the variations they do for it in comparison to the first, like having fear, disgust, and anger being on this adventure, makes this feel way more refreshing. It's also refreshing that unlike so many other Disney movies where it's just constant reminders of previous movies without being that new or original with it, this doesn't rely on nostalgia that much. Any reference they do make towards the original was usually pretty brief, but it honestly felt like it was just the right amount of callbacks that should have been made for a series like this. In fact, without spoiling too much, there's even a character they utilize here for a few funny bits that I swear was code for them essentially saying, yeah, we're not gonna be nostalgia baiting you for this entire movie. It also helps that character-wise, we get a lot more moments with characters we love from the first that feel both appropriate for the characters and not relying on old gimmicks this cast might have been known for. Joy herself gets expanded upon as she does learn new things in this movie regarding how to help Riley without just repeating the same sort of lesson from the first film. This film actually does feel fairly consistent with the first. Plus, having more screen time for characters like anger, fear, and disgust was also welcoming, as they do some really fun stuff with all three of these characters being in on the ride. The voice cast once again helped give these characters so much life. Though I guess one thing to point out is that two of the actors did not return to voice their characters from the first. Those being Disgust and Fear, which is a slight disappointment when you hear it was partially due to a pay cut. However, the new voices for them fit really well too. Actually, Disgust sounds pretty much the same to me. I can't really tell the differences between her two voice actresses, so good on that. The same can't quite be said going from Bill Hader to Tony Hale, but I think that's partially because I've heard Tony Hale in a lot more things. Yet I still think his voice fits really well for Fear. And I think it's also because I'm used to him playing very cowardly characters in the past.
A coward? I'm not a coward. Would a coward have this?
It also goes without saying that Inside Out 2 looks phenomenal. I mean, the first one already looked outstanding. And here, due to new improvements with technology, the film does look like an upgrade from the first. Not just with slightly better textures and character animation, but also this film does a lot to mix its art style up with so many cool looking set pieces, and even some different animation styles that lead to some great highlights of the film. Plus the music is still great, even despite Michael Giacchino not returning to do the score. Apparently it's someone who has worked with Giacchino in the past, named Andrea Dasman. Yet she still did an excellent job giving new themes to this movie, and utilizing old themes in new ways. Oh, and I don't want to forget about the new additions to the film as well, as anxiety kind of steals the show to an extent. The film does a great job of showcasing the struggles someone might have with anxiety, as using the personified emotion characters to represent that leads to a lot of really clever scenarios these characters have to deal with while handling a new emotion. Much like the first, the theme is about how you handle your emotions better. Yet, the conclusion they lead to still feels refreshing, mostly because it's another movie that tackles being perfect and how not being a perfect person isn't necessarily a bad thing. The film embraces the idea that you not being perfect is what makes you distinct, and there's honestly a beauty to that. It's part of the belief and learning experiences that life can give you. The execution of how they go about that, especially with the new concept of beliefs introduced in this movie, was incredibly touching, and definite proof to me that this was not a cash grab sequel. They legitimately had some great ideas here, and they pulled it off in the way that we love to see from Pixar. If I had to point out a few issues I might have had with the movie, it really comes down to two. The first being that there are other new emotions here, with envy, ennui, and embarrassment. These additions were really fun to see play out, and they all had their own funny moments to them. Yet, I feel like the movie could have expanded on these characters just a tad more. It's mostly fixated on anxiety, to where it almost feels like they couldn't think of much else to do with the other emotions here. Maybe if they make an Inside Out 3, we can see these characters expanded upon more. But as of now, I wish the film made them a little bit more prominent in the story than they already were. The other issue I had, I don't want to get into too much here, as I want to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible. But it was something that involved stuff that was established in the first Inside Out, and stuff that was honestly kind of ignored here. Without revealing too much, it does deal with how certain new characters were introduced in this that I felt somewhat contradicted the first film. Not to a point where it breaks the film, and they do address this concern, but only at the end. Like the very end, as in end credits. And even then, it's just sort of thrown off as a quick little gag. Again, the movie is still excellent. I just wish they addressed that situation a little more than they actually did within the movie. Yet, even despite that minor grievance, the film, I think, did its job of following up Inside Out excellently. This is the first time in a long time where a Pixar sequel is nearly as good as its predecessor. Its theme on trying to establish yourself and how you're using your belief as a learning experience, both through the good and the bad, is a smart message for kids. And Pixar pulled that off with just as much emotional flair as you would expect. I highly recommend seeing Inside Out 2. It's by far the best animated film I've seen this year. And I'm glad to see a sequel to one of Pixar's finest work live up to the hype. Props to all the talented animators at Pixar for putting their all within this, as this film is certainly worth going through those emotions to witness Pixar striking magic yet again. So take that for what it's worth. And I'm gonna give Inside Out 2 a 9 out of 10. The other movie I decided to check out recently was Kinds of Kindness. Kinds of Kindness was admittedly the other major film I was super looking forward to in the summer of 2024. It's the newest film from Yorgos Lanthimos, the director of my favorite movie of last year, Poor Things. So of course I'd be interested to see what he brings up next, as he's been one I've been following for a while, creating some of the strangest and some of the most out there movies I can think of. Yet, he's totally worth the hype. Admittedly, I didn't know a whole lot about this film going in, mostly because the trailers don't really reveal a whole lot of details. Even despite not knowing what the plot is, that still didn't stop me from being interested. The only things I was aware about with this film is that it's Yorgos Lanthimos, it stars Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe, and a bunch of other actors that I enjoy, and it's an anthology film, which was enough to sell me on that alone. Though how is it now after seeing it? Well, much like what I would expect from Yorgos Lanthimos, it is certainly one of a kind, as I think this is a pretty damn great movie that's very ambitious. Probably not for everyone, because it does go into extreme territory. It's a lot darker and a bit more intense at points that feels a lot more similar in the vein of Yorgos' earlier work. It reminded me a lot of Killing of the Sacred Deer, as it's a film that goes in so many different directions that you can't really predict what it's going to do next. As stated earlier, this is an anthology film, but the underlying connection between these stories isn't quite as clear outside of the themes of how far people are willing to go for satisfaction of any sorts. The film has 3 segments. The first dealing with Jesse Plemons, working for Willem Dafoe. The second dealing with Plemons and Emma Stone's marriage life and a tragic accident Stone dealt with. And the third one is where they both end up being a part of a cult. Now, the interesting thing about this anthology is while each skit has all the same actors, every one of them plays a different character in each segment. So you would have Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe, Jesse Plemons, Margaret Qualley, Hong Chow, and a few others really showcasing a lot of versatility within this film alone, as each one of them plays very distinct performances throughout the film. Considering how great all these actors have been in roles in the past, they all do an unsurprisingly great job in this film. Stone, coming off of Poor Things, is awesome, and you get to see her dance excellently in this. And again, Willem Dafoe is a national treasure. Where the movie might not be as appealing for some people is that this movie does go rather extreme at points, yet it still manages to be entertaining in the most Yorgos Lanthimos way. Each segment has a ton of moments that feel almost like an endurance with how brutal some of these parts can get. Yet it's also mixed in with a lot of dark humor, very similar in the vein of Poor Things, but not as surreal, and ironically enough, not as accessible. The first segment is very fascinating, and I think it comes across the themes of doing acts of kindness to get approval, and that being done to its extreme, probably the best out of all of them. It's also the most humorous of the bunch, with the most dark comedic turns in the film, I say. The second segment was probably my least favorite of the bunch. It definitely had a lot of intrigue on where the story was going, yet I'm not sure what to make of the conclusion of it just yet. It's certainly an interesting take, but I think I need a little more to sleep on with this one to see what it actually means. The third one is also really intriguing, being also the one most fixated on Emma Stone, as she definitely makes this a compelling segment. Though fair warning, I say this final segment goes the most extreme, as it does deal with certain amount of content that can deal with an act of SA. So if that kind of stuff really gets under your skin, this might not be the movie for you. It is dark, but it also has the most mystery to it, and I was captivated by where it was going to go. The other thing that makes this movie fantastic is just the whole production. The cinematography, editing, and all-around directing is top-notch here. The shots are well composed, the editing is meticulous and unique, plus it's also just a neat production altogether that feels big despite not being a blockbuster. Also, the score in this is excellent. Some really top-notch work from the Poor Things composer, Jerskin Fendrick. To prove that this score is one of a kind, you know when shit is going down real bad when even the choir of the score is saying no. It's all of this that makes Kinds of Kindness, while not the most accessible movie of his work, a very fascinating experience to say the least. If you're a fan of Yorgos, this is definitely worth checking out, as it's every little bit as strange, dark, and intriguing throughout its 2.5 hour long runtime. If you are new to Yorgos Lanthimos as a director, though, I probably wouldn't have this be your first film from him, because it does go out there. If anything, I say Poor Things is a better movie to get introduced to Yorgos' distinct style of filmmaking. Yes, I know, the movie with a dog head on a duck's body is somehow more accessible than the seemingly normal movie, but if you've seen both, trust me when I say it will make sense. Kinds of Kindness is still a super distinct feature film that I'm glad exists, simply for giving creative minds like Yorgos an opportunity to do some out there stuff. It's hard not to admire a filmmaker who can create the most one-of-a-kind movies out there, while also just giving Emma Stone the time of her life as an actress. So take that for what it's worth. And I'm gonna give Kinds of Kindness a 9 out of 10. So those are my thoughts on Inside Out 2 and Kinds of Kindness. What did you guys think about those movies if you happen to see them yet? Comment below, let me know. Hit that red subscribe button and bell icon for more notifications for future videos. And I'll see you guys again soon. Later.
Except for this bad boy. This one will never fade.
The song from the gum commercial.